And redirecting. All right. Well, we are live. I'm live here with Bennett Minton. I know Bennett from the gratitude training, and we've had the chance to sit over lunch in Washington, D.C. Bennett is he's a well-studied human in American history, and he has a lifelong career background in politics and journalism. Bennett, thank you for joining us for this conversation in Liberty.
Well, thank you, Nathan.
You were starting to share a little bit about your background, that you, even as a child, you were involved in politics because your father was in the Senate. Would you like to share a little bit about your upbringing and how you've been involved in politics?
The first campaign I had anything to do with, I guess, was George McGovern's in 1972. By then, I was at the ripe old age of 14. I read the first Watergate story in the Washington Post the day it came out, in the page 3 of the local section, because I was a newspaper reader starting when I was 10. And that certainly influenced my decision to go into journalism, but I had some folks in the family who had been reporters. My grandmother was a reporter, and in her 30s walked from Texas to New York writing about it along the way. So this was part of the family lore. The other side of the family was lawyers, and I didn't want to be a lawyer. But I was interested in DC always, and I spent 28 years in my career in DC as a lobbyist, reporter, congressional press secretary, analyst, mostly in tax and budget policy. That's my expertise. Sorry, somebody's calling me, but I don't need to talk to him. So anyway, and then I retired 6 years ago because I could no longer sit and watch Congress be dysfunctional. I was committed to, the reason that I did it was because I'm an advocate of democracy and the practice of politics as a way to resolve issues in our society. And it became so personally frustrating to watch Congress devote itself to fundraising and press releases that I just said, I can't do this anymore. And I walked into my boss's office and I said, I quit. I'm not gonna, I could sail on and have a comfortable retirement if I stayed here for another 5 years, but if that's the case, then just shoot me now.
Wow. Wow, I'm hearing you had an integrity that democracy works, and it doesn't seem like the government's working right now. What would you say is like the main thing that's out that the government doesn't seem to be operating within to be functional?
Disrespect for all of us, which shows that, I mean, they're only manifesting. I mean, every society always has the government it deserves. We always manifest what we want. The Germans manifested Hitler.
Wow.
Iraq manifested Saddam. We manifested the founding fathers. We manifested the Civil War. We manifested Lincoln. We manifested Obama. We manifested Trump. It is a reflection of who and where we are in the system that we have created.
So you're saying this is all connected, and every time the government we have is exactly the government that we've chosen.
Every people everywhere chooses the government it has.
Wow.
Which is why foreign invasions make no sense. I mean, certainly it doesn't make sense for us to invade other countries on the basis of, oh, we're going to show them how they should do things. No, they're doing things how they should do things. It is their own path to figure out the government they want to have.
So you were involved in Congress from the level of budget and economics, is that correct? Like managing budget policy?
Well, I certainly wasn't managing it, but I was explaining it to whatever discrete audience was hiring me and paying me oodles of money to have it explained to them. Yes.
So there's a lot of different things that are out in government, but you saw it from the perspective of budget. Would you say that one of the biggest problems is money's involvement in politics?
You mean the way we finance our campaigns?
Yeah, that's definitely one part.
It's top two or three or four issues. Yeah.
What do you think legislatively? Is there like a law that would allow there to be more integrity in these campaigns? What would bring integrity to that?
We need to figure out some means of campaign finance that's public campaign finance.
So you're
It's
talking
paid
about,
for by us because all this money is only energy, and we have determined for the moment that campaigns should be funded by citizens or corporations or this interest or that. It's all the same money. It's just organized in different ways. So the corporation's money is not the corporation's money. I mean, that was one of Mitt Romney kind of got it right. What is a corporation? Well, it's a collection of people, and the government has given it exemption from being sued so that it can pursue doing whatever it is that is its mission to do, create whatever it's going to create. And you give it liability protection as part of the deal. But a corporation is a fiction. It's only made up of people. So we've decided that certain people get to fund campaigns and draw on their collection of money to do it. We could decide to fund it in a different way, spend the same amount of money or less money or whatever. But, we have a constellation that's decided, no, we can't do that and we can't put limits on it. And the Supreme Court's been involved in the ridiculous Buckley decision back in the 70s that created the stream of decisions that now has that money is speech. Well, it's an interpretation.
So you have highly consolidated pockets of wealth within corporations that are purchasing influence in the government, first from the campaign end, but I also understand that some of this corruption ends up in lobbying and how they're influencing Congress and the legislative process.
Well, understand that there's nothing in itself that's corrupt about lobbying.
Okay.
It's protected in the First Amendment. You have the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It's the First Amendment. But now we have a cycle where the money from those interests goes into campaigns to perpetuate the interests represented by those members of Congress or local. It's at all levels, but it's particularly egregious in Congress.
Is there any part of that that's addressed by term limits, do you think?
I think term limits is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea.
And why is that?
We're free to, it wouldn't actually change anything. Okay, replace Mitch McConnell with another Republican. Mitch McConnell is representing the voters of Kentucky and doing it very well. So you replace him with another guy who has the same, you're not going to elect Bernie Sanders in Kentucky.
It's a revolving door. You just put more.
And you're not going to elect Mitch McConnell in Vermont. So no, that's dumb. But the main reason that I oppose term limits is because Congress is the overseer, the policymaker for the government. It is the only body in our system that's capable of overseeing the executive.
Oh.
So if you have amateurs in Congress, and they're going to be amateurs if you have term limits, who has the expertise to oversee the executive and keep tabs on how the executive performs the functions that Congress has assigned it to perform?
I got that. So there's a professionalism in terms of if these people perform their jobs well and they continually get reelected by their constituents, that there's value in having that level of expertise maintained in Congress.
Well, it certainly wouldn't solve any problem. I mean, they may not be exercising oversight. Certainly, they're not exercising oversight now. And you know, the White House just, whenever there's an inquiry or a subpoena, the White House just says no. Well, that's what that shows is our system only works when people honor the system that we have created. And we now have a collection of people in the administration who don't honor, because you can't regulate this. This is
how much
this
of
is
this
honorable behavior.
How much of this is partisanship, like people kind of collecting in their camps and protecting their people?
Totally.
Either side.
Totally. Absolutely. It's situational ethics.
I don't know how you break up partisanship. It's almost like it has to be people having a change of thought for themselves about identifying so strongly with either party.
Well, the key word in what you just said is identity. We're tied up in an identity of Republican or Democrat. I mean, I have friends now, and I don't mean this in a partisan way, but I have friends now who have been moving toward the Democratic Party. They would never want to put it that way because their identity is tied up in being a Republican. And 40 years ago, there were lots of Democrats who went to the Republican Party, and it is so hard for any of us to change an identity. And particularly in a highly politicized environment. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a politicized environment. But the problem is that we are so caught up in the identity of what is it to be a Republican or what is it to be a Democrat.
You think part of that's tied up in the approval you get with people on your side, and then the ostracization, the pain related with, you know, being judged if you're on the other side? Like I'm
not sure it has anything to do with what other people think about it. I mean, certainly within your own family or some tight social circle. I think it's more tied up in who you think you are yourself. You know, I mean, I grew up as a Democrat. It is inconceivable to me. I have voted for Republicans, but I remember I was a delegate at the local level for John Anderson when he ran for president in 1980, which required that I go to a Republican Party convention, and I actually wrote a check to the local Republican convention. And here I was writing a check, and I was thinking about what would my father say about this? So, you know, to me, it just shows me how much of my own identity is tied up in that. Now, parties change. Parties are collections of interests. They are coalitions. There is no such thing as a Democrat or a Republican. It's a brand that stands for certain things. And when the brand, when those things change, and they've been changing in recent years, because the traditional interests of the Republican Party have in some ways changed. Like it's gone from being pro-immigration to anti-immigration. It's always been a big business party, always, since Lincoln was president. But, you know, certain elements like that, or trade being the other prominent issue. Like Republican was always for free trade. Now they're not.
Is there any way to rectify that? There's only, like, I'm an independent, and I feel like for me I have to decide what's important to me, and I have to engage with either one party or the other, where I find things important on both sides. But how do independents really decide for themselves? Is there room for an actual third party in this country? Because right now I feel split about both directions.
Well, there's there's always room for a third party to be established. What happens is that one or the other in our history ends up absorbing.
Mm.
And the last time that didn't happen was the Republicans in 1856. And the Republicans in 1856 basically replaced the Whigs. The Whig party just died because it no longer stood for anything. And the Republican Party came forward with a really strong platform and created something. Third parties now, they're going to come out of some faction. The thing about third parties is they tend to be on the outside rather than the inside.
Mm.
You're talking about the inside lane.
Yep.
We don't have any third parties that were ever inside lane.
So it's really to change one of these two parties. You're saying that these are evolving platforms and they just reflect the interest of the people. Really, to actually make a change, at least in our system, the way it is today, is to change one of these two platforms on the left or the right.
Yeah, and you know, the GOP platform has changed substantially in the last even 10 years. The Democratic platform had a unbelievable change between the 1940s and the 1970s. I mean, to have gone from Woodrow Wilson to George McGovern, like what? So these, you know, and these things happen. But for independents, my advice is always is, okay, you know what your values are. Figure out which party aligns most closely with your values and vote that way. And I've had conversations with voters while canvassing, and they say, yeah, but you know, I'm big on the defense budget, but also big on civil liberties. And I said, yeah, okay, you got a problem.
Some people, I mean, I know I'm not going to name any names. I got people in my family, but I feel like for some people it's a defining issue to go one way or the other. And for me, I look at like the whole collection of everything, and it's not a one issue game. It's a what's the entire ecosystem look like? Am I going
Right.
to do?
Oh, yeah. And certainly there are single issue voters. I have them in my family too. Like abortion is the only issue, everything else is secondary. Um,
I Oh, go ahead. I have a question. Bringing it more to values, what is liberty in a free society? What is it to us as people, and how do we exercise and even protect liberty?
well, as we were exchanging notes the other day, I take a dim view of liberty unless you can define what it is. Um, right now, we're engaged in a conversation about my liberty to wear or not wear a mask,
Mm.
and what an entirely useless exercise that is, because we exist in community, and the word liberty seems to have been taken hostage by a view of I can do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. We have a Supreme Court that's decided that the Second Amendment is an individual right rather than a collective right. It was written as a collective right. It's been interpreted now as an individual right. To me, that is how we think now. We think about my individual right to whatever, and we've lost all sense of community. So I don't even like the word anymore unless we can redefine it.
I'd like to redefine it because and it's great that you're coming at this from the left. I had a conversation with a Republican a few days ago, and we were talking in agreement about how liberty is only liberty if the rule of liberty is do no harm to others. And now we're engaged in this conversation with masks where, you have doctors saying one thing and you have people and you got different people at war with whether or not this even makes us safe, for one. And then for two is like, well, if this is really a liberty conversation, if the core tenet of liberty is, at least the way I have it, is, well, it's liberty as long as I'm not doing harm to others. do I actually even have a right to say no to wearing a mask? Because it seems to me that if we're a free society, we're a free society to the extent that it doesn't harm others.
I don't even like the construction of do no harm to others. Yesterday I went to the hospital. I injured my knee, and everyone in that hospital was dedicated to my interest. Even in this time of COVID, every single person was gracious and polite and helpful. And I mean, I was practically in tears. Their life is not dedicated to doing whatever it is that they do not to harm others. Their life is dedicated to others. Now, if I go for a bike ride out in the mountains, I'm doing that essentially for me. But at the same time, I'm posting a script with some photos about the destruction of the forest that I see around me, and how it is that people who think that they've gone forth to serve others because they're providing plywood or whatever, well, they're also destroying habitat in the forest. So you got to be really careful about, well, I'm doing no harm to others. Well, are you sure about that?
Well, that brings me to your blog, Transformational Citizenship. You have this blog, and you were explaining before this call of this core tenet for that, for your writing, that it's this butterfly effect, that it's all connected and we're all one. And I guess what I'm hearing and what you're saying is, like, in one hand, yeah, you're creating jobs, you're creating resources for society, but on this other hand, it's you're destroying a habitat. And then there's the long-term impacts of it takes time for the habitat to recover. And are we being sustainable in how we're managing our resources right now?
Well, and in the case of the forest, we've converted an old growth forest, which has its own ecology, into a plantation. And since between the time that Chicago was mowed down like a lawnmower in order to build Chicago and now, we have lost half the world's forests.
Wow.
And deforestation is a greater contribution to climate change than is burning fossil fuels. And by the end of the century, we will have eliminated at least another quarter. So we'll be down to 25% of what we had 200 years ago, 300 years ago. Human life for 9 billion people is not sustainable with 1/4 of the forest that we had 200 years ago. We are at the beginning of a die-off, and COVID is a sign of it.
So we have to step into something now. First of all, protecting what's already there, and second of all, replanting what's already been destroyed in hopes that we can make a recovery from
Well,
this.
we don't need to replant the forest. The forests know how to plant the forests. The idea that we need to manage the forest is absurd. The forests have been managing themselves for a billion years, and they're doing just fine. If we just left them alone, they'd recover in their own time. Maybe not on our timeline, but Mother Nature's always going to be fine. Our ability to live on this planet, bets are off.
Yeah, I really get that. Do you have any hope? And I know we've been on for about 30 minutes. Do you have any? I mean, I lost track of time. Do you have any hope that there are things coming forth in technology in terms of renewable, and that maybe we're at a turning point, or is it mostly we got to deal with some tough decisions and impacts right now?
Well, I don't think we will deal with tough decisions. There's no evidence that we'll deal with tough decisions. We always look to technology to save us in one way or another. Technology creates its own issues. I went to a reading last year of a guy who'd written a book called The End of Ice, and he traveled around the world talking to scientists in various hotspots about what was going on. So he finished his talk, and I asked him, what do your scientist sources tell you is the maximum sustainable population of Earth? And he said, well, they won't tell me. My estimate is 1 billion.
Wow. So how are we doing this with 7?
Well, COVID is a really inefficient start because it's
Hmm.
not killing many people. But that's okay, because there will be other viruses that will come from our having destroyed habitat. Because COVID is caused by um, the breakdown in the barrier between non-human animals and us, bats and
Hmm.
stuff.
So you're saying how we're treating the planet is what's accelerating the creation of viruses and certain other things that are going to impact the population.
That's what the scientists are telling us.
Hmm.
That's where Ebola came from. The destruction of the forests in Western Africa led the bats to come live in villages, and people caught the virus from the bats who no longer lived in the forest because the forest didn't exist.
I guess in China it was a little different. They actually were eating the bats, so they went out and got the bats and brought them to.
Whatever, right? It again, it's we're breaking down the barrier, and it happens in different ways. So that, but that's just one little element of, viruses. It'll kill some people, won't kill that many. We've gone through plagues before. We end up surviving. But we do need to, if we want to survive, it will be with a lot fewer people. How that works out, I don't know. It doesn't particularly bother me that it's going to happen.
Is there a future scenario where people start to be responsible and intelligent and we maintain at this level of 7 billion, or do you believe
Our
it's
brains have,
inevitable?
human beings in their current constitution have been around for what, 100,000 years? Our brains have not changed. We still have the same operating system we had then. Our values have changed a little bit over time, sometimes, and then they fall back. We're the same beings that we've always been until we have a shift in consciousness. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't see any evidence that our behavior is fundamentally going to change.
So the current trajectory is pretty much destruction. And for us to even have a shot, it's either there's going to be a big die off, which sounds like a catastrophe, or there's a shift in consciousness, which we have no precedent for in our history. We don't even know what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a good sum. That's my, I, I don't know. Maybe there's some other options, but aliens are going to land and are going to show us this is how you do it, and we'll go, oh yeah, right. We should have seen that.
It seems there's a lot of people across the political spectrum, whether you look at the left or the right, really rooting for some sort of shift in consciousness. But we use this language like we know what it is. I don't know what a shift in consciousness even is. It seems to me that it's a change in the way things are done and the way we all act with each other. But I don't know that I actually know what that is because I've never had it.
Well, I think it looks like a true understanding and then a behavior that reflects that separation is illusion.
Mm. Sounds like it's more spiritual than anything, the way you said it. And I don't know if that's the right word, but it's an experience of people having that we're all one, and that for this to work, who I'm being is going to impact you. I'm here in South Florida, you're out there in Oregon, but some way or another, what I'm doing with how I'm disposing of my rubbish or whatever, there's a ripple effect that impacts every single person on this planet. And even to the metaphor of a single person eating a bat in China, well, that actually changed the world.
Yeah. That movie Contagion that came out 10 years ago, we recently watched, and I just thought, yeah, absolutely. It's just so brilliant, because yeah, this one thing happened, and then there was a big die off. Boom, just like that.
So if anything, this is revealing to us how fragile we are. And it sounds like we got lucky that this time around it wasn't a serious one. I mean, it's still serious, but it's not like wipe everyone out serious. It's like a little bit more manageable. But at the very
I
least,
think if we stand far enough back, we may have a different interpretation of what is lucky and what is unlucky. Like, look, we're all here in this form for a period of time, and we all die. I'm 62. I've had a glorious life full of, pain and tragedy and wonderful moments and, two wives and two kids and two dogs and, all the other things, travel and all of that. If I died tomorrow, I've had a perfectly fulfilled life. I hope you make it as long as I have, but yeah, I don't have any say in that. And if you didn't, you could look back on the period that you've had and said, I've had a fabulous life. So
that's almost outlook. I think it's not negotiable that we're going to go through suffering, and at the same time we're going to have moments of joy and happiness and love. And it's really having the whole perspective that's like, wow, I'm here, and that I'm even here in this body. There's like a miracle to life that I'm here, and if it ended tomorrow, that's okay.
yesterday I injured my knee and now I'm hobbling around on crutches. And so now I get to move at a much, much slower pace. And basically, I'll be spending the entire day on this sofa. And that's okay.
Well, I
Eventually,
hope.
my knee will, it'll get fixed and I'll get on my bike again. This is where I am now. I'm grateful.
That's beautiful. Well, thanks for sharing all this, Bennett. I really appreciate just everything. You really brought a whole world, and I think I really enjoyed it. I don't even know who's listening on Facebook, but just if it was just me and you, I had a great conversation with you.
Well, it's you're inspired to um, take this on for the 4th of July. If my wish is that we go back and read that document from beginning to end. And while we're at it, we would also read Lincoln's second inaugural.
Mm. I might actually go look that up.
The
I think that
greatest
sounds.
speech, the greatest speech in American history that includes the greatest sentence in American history. And when you read the sentence, you'll know which one it is.
Beautiful.
Because it
Well,
will reflect whatever it is that you think is the greatest sentence.
wow.
Okay.
Thank you, Bennett. Appreciate your
Thank
time,
you,
and
Mitch.
please feel
Bye-bye.
better.
Yep.
Heal up.
All right.
Bye, Bennett.
Bye.